All right, everyone. This is going to be a video on dispensationalism, and the man who is most responsible in the United States for creating it is a man named Clarence Larkin, apparently a reverend, and he was born in 1815, died in 1924. He was an American pastor, Baptist pastor, Bible teacher, and author whose writings on dispensationalism had a great impact on conservative Protestant visual culture. In the 20th century, he used intricate and influential charts, providing his readers with a visual strategy for mapping God's action in history and for interpreting complex biblical prophecies. But as I said, he's the founder of modern American dispensationalism, and this is the doctrine that is the enemy of the church. Whether he knew it or not, I'm sure he thought he was doing the right thing, but it basically it turned most of the church, most of our pastors, into people who think Jesus did not become a king when he was here. He ascended into heaven without becoming a king, and therefore he did not have a kingdom that he is ruling and reigning over right now. And as a result, we are subject to one and only one voice, and that's the Apostle Paul. They claim he's an apostle. He's the only one we listen to. He's in touch with the ascended Jesus. The 12 were basically part of the old dispensation of the Jewish nation, since the Jewish nation rejected the gospel for them, supposedly. Then Jesus, in the ascended state, had to turn to Paul to try to get the Gentiles in, and basically that's how we're where we are at the moment. So let me just show you one thing. If you want to have the most authoritative source of the dispensational doctrine, you can just find it at Blue Letter Bible for free. Clarence Larkin's book is right here online. Chapter 13 is most important, and they have that right here. This is at blueletterbible.org/study/larkin/dt/13.cfm. I'm not recommending him. I'm recommending us to learn about what he's teaching and why it's false. And one of the most problematical points they have is, or what they try to claim, is that in John 18:33 to 37, where Pilate comes to Jesus and says, "Are you a king?" Or "You're a king, aren't you?" Or something to that effect. And Jesus says, "You said it," but he meant you said you are saying it correctly. You are correct. I am a king. So, but however, the way they interpret it is the kingdom was only at hand when Jesus was trying to bring it to the Jewish people. They supposedly rejected it. Larkin completely ignores contrary evidence. The statement in Acts 21:21, where James, the Bishop of Jerusalem, tells Paul, tens of thousands of Jews have accepted Christ, and we're doing great. And basically, there wasn't really much of a Gentile ministry, so the overwhelming acceptance of the Christian faith was true and apparent in Acts 21:21. And in all of Acts, there's maybe 43 converts that Paul obtains, and predominantly, maybe not even predominantly, maybe half were Gentiles, because he had 15 people who had been baptized by John, and he gets credit for that. So, I mean, if you subtract that, and they're probably all Jews, how many people did he really convert even there? So the overwhelming evidence is contrary to what this man Larkin's saying. But his position is the Jews rejected the gospel, therefore Jesus did not become king, and he wasn't accepted by the people of Israel. He was killed and crucified, and he ascended, but without becoming king. But they do not like this verse here. So here's what they say. So the verse they don't like, the dispensationalists don't like, is John 18, verse 37. So he refers to it, and he says, when Pilate asked Jesus, let me highlight this for you. When Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" he evaded the question. No, he did not. He point blank answers him. It's as you say correctly. And then he says, "For I am a king." So they don't like that, and they don't prefer it being cleared up in the translations. But we showed you, we did a video on that's what it means. There's an idiom there. So he did not evade the question, but they begin falsely that way, but admitted that he was a king. So at least to that extent, they're accepting it. But you're going to see like of what. So you have to understand that Larkin believed that Jesus could only be king if a true political kingdom had existed, but when he went to the cross. Since that didn't happen, he didn't succeed. Therefore, there was no kingdom that came. So so he says, and to that end I had been born, but that his kingdom was not of this world. So ultimately, instead of him, Larkin, accepting that means a spiritual kingdom is Jesus's kingdom. It doesn't have to be physical. He's thinking that it's up there in heaven, and so Jesus has to go there and get it and bring it back down because he failed. So this is the reasoning of this man. It's a 1920s type of mentality, and this has permeated our this level of lack of sophistication is permeated our entire Christian academic institutions, that they're all dispensationalists, pretty much, where Paul's the only apostle that we need to listen to. He's talking with the ascended Jesus, and he gave us the messages that we needed, our marching orders. We've done videos on Breaker and Mr. Jordan, and they're both doctrinaire. The four gospels don't matter. We don't need to pay attention. That's not our marching orders. That's not our prayer. Prayer time shouldn't be spent on anything in those. Just focus in on all the epistles of Paul. That they're very blunt. But we're going to see there's going to be some prophecies today we're going to go through that prove Paul is not on the good list. And we're going to see that in the prophecy of the Son of Man in Daniel. And we're also going to see how that came about during Jesus's. I think you're going to agree with me that it came about that Jesus, while he was here on earth, actually did ascend to heaven to take the reception of the kingdom from God in what we see as Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. It's not material that you have to agree with that, but you'll see that it fits all the picture, all the statements of Jesus and his parables where he talks about going away and coming back, and now he's going to expect his citizens to produce fruit. Okay, anyway, we'll stop. Okay, so we're going to have a lesson today on dispensationalism, and the dispensationalists say that Jesus' kingdom offer was rejected by the Jewish people. That means Jesus, when he left here, never had become king, and because of that, he has to come back later at another time, and until that time's over, we are all to just follow what Paul taught us. That's the gospel of grace. Just give that easy peasy gospel, and we will fill up the kingdom. So when Jesus comes, there's all these happy people ready to welcome him back, and that's the expectation of Christians. It's totally the opposite of what they're doing. They're doing absolutely the wrong thing of the way they're doing it. So because following Paul and not following Jesus is not the solution, but that's what they've been told, and that's what dispensationalism is all about. And we're going to disprove it today when you listen to the words of Jesus, which they're trained not to do so. So I hope they'll try occasionally to look over the fence and see what's on the other side and see if there's any truth they're missing by hearing what Jesus has to say. So anyway, this is important, Zechariah 9, verse 9, because Jesus is going to invoke this by his actions. It's a passage on a king coming into the community of Israel. Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. And then Jesus has a reaction when he's just walking through the city and the people are accolading him, meaning they're accepting him as whatever you're going to see here. So contrary to the myth of the dispensationalists that the Jewish people rejected, Jesus as preposterous. And in fact, I'm going to digress for a second. In Acts 21, verse 21, look it up. It says many myriads. That's the word, many myriads, which is the number 10,000 in Greek. It's also 10,000 in English. But for some bizarre reason, it's translated as thousands. But it's many tens of thousands of Jews, James tells Paul, have come to Christ and accepted Christ. And in this context, he's asking Paul, he says, we've heard a rumor that you're guilty of apostasia. So you need to look at that Greek word too and realize the church is getting wind of what's really going on with Paul. And he says, Paul, we want you to prove to everyone these scurrilous charges against you that you're not following the law, is you can prove to them they're false by taking this vow under the Nazirite vow, under Numbers chapter 6 of the Torah, and pay for these 4 other guys, and everybody will see, you'll put on a good display that everyone will know you're law compliant. We won't hear this problem anymore. And Paul, instead of saying they're absolutely correct, I'm not, I believe, and this is after he's written Galatians and saying the law was given by angels, not by God. He's telling James, oh, sure, I'll do this, no problem. He doesn't alert him that he is completely what people are saying he is. See, but at this point, he's able to fool them, and that's just the way it is. But anyway, what we have here is the people took up palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna, save, blessed is the King of Israel. So we have James saying, Acts 21:21, that many myriads, tens of thousands that accepted Christ. We have here the spontaneous reaction of the people, clearly are shouting and excited about Jesus as their king. Now, how does Jesus respond? Does he say, no, I'm not your king? Or does he give them signs that he is their king? Well, in the succeeding chapter, chapter 12, verses 14 to 15, it says, and Jesus, when he had found a young ass, sat thereon, as it is written, fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, your king comes sitting on a donkey's colt. So that means Jesus declared he is a king currently by the act of getting on that donkey. Jesus did something similar in his encounter in Luke 23, verse 3. And this slide is titled, Had God Made Jesus King Prior to the Crucifixion? The people who are dispensationalists generally contend no, although you saw there, I gave you Larkin's quote of John 18, verse 37, and he seemed to say that Jesus said yes, but then he takes it away by arguing that it's still in the future. But you listen to this and you just have to solidify in your mind that that's false. So it's a false suggestion that he didn't actually become king while he was still here. And Pilate asked him, saying, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered to him and said, it is as you say. In Gill's commentary, he says, and he answered him and said, thou sayest, that is, thou sayest well, it is as thou say, I am the king of the Jews. Same thing in John 18:37, which I mentioned before. Larkin basically had to acknowledge it was saying, yes, I am a king, but then tried to use vague ideas that Jesus would only in the future come into his kingdom, so you can just disregard it. You have to know you can't do that, because we're getting repeated statements by the apostolic memory of what he said, and it was affirmative at that time. He was already a king. We're going to see there's going to be tons of proof, but we need to solidify it in our brains. Therefore, Pilate said to him, then are you a king? Jesus answered, you say correctly that I am a king. That's really the synonymous thing to here in Luke 23:3, right? And he says, it is as you say, and you say correctly that I am a king. So it's the same thing. Gill's commentary here is, Jesus answered, thou sayest that I am a king, and which was very rightly said, and Christ by these words owns and confesses that he was one, meaning a king. Now, I want to teach us about a parable of the minas, and actually this integrates pretty closely with another parable of Matthew. The words actually overlap at various points, so we're going to mesh them a little bit together today. You'll see. But that'll bring more meaning out of the passages. So the synoptics have this benefit that sometimes we don't realize it. Seeing them side by side was a very common thing that was done in the early church. Origen did it. He did one for the Old Testament, called it the Hexapla, and then he did something similar for the New Testament. He did this. He took the synoptics and put them side by side, including John. Okay. Luke 9, verses 11 to 27. And as they heard these things, he added and spoke a parable, because he was nigh to Jerusalem, and because they thought that the kingdom of God should appear and immediately appear. He said, therefore, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom, and to return. Now, I'm going to suggest to you that Jesus already did receive his kingdom before the end of this parable. I'm going to race a little bit ahead, so I want to show you something. So we're going to look at the Transfiguration as proof of that, right? I'll show this all to you in a second. But I want you to understand. So this is the verse where we're going to pick up after I tell you about the Transfiguration. What's following is Jesus is going to talk about the king. Okay, so what I want to do is use this passage to make you reconceptualize, was Jesus a king before he went to heaven? Now, we already saw the proof that he was, because that's what's happening in his own statements in front of Pilate. Also, much earlier, when the people are accolading him as he's coming into Jerusalem and they're calling him their king, and he's actually encouraging it by getting on the donkey. So he believes he's a king then and now. How did he become a king? Now, when we read this verse in Luke 19:15, and we're going to go through this slower later, is he's going to say, and it came to pass then when he, this ruler, let's say, but maybe not a king at the moment, when he returned, he having received the kingdom. So he goes away to receive a kingdom, and he comes back, and now he goes to his servants, and these are the citizens of his kingdom, and he's holding them responsible. Now they knew where he was going, and he was telling them, I'm going to come back and I'm going to hold you accountable. But many of us think that this parable means Jesus is going away to heaven to become a king in the future after he's ascended, for example, when it's more likely he already became a king while he was here. And we have to then figure out, how did that happen and when did that happen? And I think I can show you when it happened, okay, that it was at the Transfiguration. Jesus ascends into heaven. And the Daniel prophecy of chapter 7, verse 13, 14 is then put into motion. It all happens. He's given the kingdom at that point. He's sent back to earth, descends back to earth. And this is while the apostles have fallen asleep. We'll go through that. And then that's why he's now king. So he didn't start off as a king, and the kingdom was at hand earlier in his ministry. And this is what the dispensationalists all look at, is repeatedly in the early part of his ministry, the kingdom is only at hand. But later, Jesus seeming to show, like when he's doing the walking into Jerusalem and allowing the accolades and sitting on a donkey, he's making a statement, I'm king. And then in front of Pilate, he says, I'm king. And then if you listen to this parable, which is about 10 chapters after the Transfiguration, I believe what he's saying is he already made this trip away and has returned, and he is now king. And so he is literally saying, at this time, I am the king giving you these instructions, and then I'm telling you what I'm going to expect. And if you don't give it to me, this is the consequence for you. So he's going to tell you that precisely. So let's take a quick look at the Transfiguration and see if you can't see what I'm seeing. All right, so let's go backwards to the Daniel prophecy. Okay, so we're going to now break off from the parable of the 10 minas in Luke, and we're going to go to the Transfiguration. Transfiguration appears at least in Mark 9 and Matthew 17, and let's listen. Jesus takes with him Peter and James and John, so 3 apostles, and leads them up into a high mountain apart by themselves, and he was transfigured before them, and his raiment became shining, exceedingly white as snow, so as that no fuller, remember Fuller Brush? That was the name of a company that used to sell laundry brushes. So no laundryman on earth can whiten them. So this is meaning the clothing could never be made even more white. It's just so exceedingly white. And then merge Luke 9:30 in, and it says, and behold, there talked with him 2 men, which were Moses and Elias, and then verse 31, who appeared in glory and spake of his decease, meaning his death, which he should accomplish at Jerusalem. Luke 9, verse 32, but Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they were awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men that stood with him. So there was a time that Jesus is communing, talking with Moses and Elijah, and they just fall asleep. They couldn't stay awake. That's a moment in time, somewhere in that gap of time, he could have disappeared from their sight and ascended into heaven. And the events that I'm going to show you that are happening or happen in Daniel 7, verse 13 to 14, I believe you can make a claim they happened. Anyway, let's keep going. Mark 9, verse 7, and there was a cloud that overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud saying, this is my beloved son, listen to him. And the reason God is saying that, Yahweh is saying that from heaven, is in the passage of Deuteronomy 18, verses 16 to 19, God promises a special prophet. So Jesus is not just Messiah, but he's the special prophet called the prophet. And this is referenced a couple of times in the book of John about the people are saying, "Are you the prophet?" Well, yes, that's exactly who he was, and that's why God Yahweh is quoting this passage of Deuteronomy, where twice Yahweh says it once and Moses says it another time, that Moses will do what God said to teach the people to listen to this prophet when he shows up. And the difference with this prophet, he'll be like Moses. He'll be a man like you, Moses, which God says. But every word he speaks shall be from me, which was not true with Moses. Moses had to say, I'm quoting Yahweh. Yahweh told me this. Yahweh told me that. This person, God's dwelling in him in essence, and that's what we'll learn. But God doesn't explain all these details to Moses. Just says, when he speaks, everything he says is from me. So Jesus doesn't have to quote God every time he talks. You will know if you recognize he's the prophet, then you will know you have to take every word he says as if it's coming from God, unless Jesus himself says, sometimes you will know it's not Yahweh speaking, but it's me speaking on my own. And that's in John chapter 7, verses, I think it's 14 to 16. So that's why Jesus is automatically authoritative and doesn't have to quote, saying, I'm quoting Yahweh. See, but an apostle can't be a prophet unless they quote Yahweh. See, so it's a block, but only the prophet has this unique ability to just talk, and he has to be accepted. But why? What proved it? 3 people were at this transfiguration, and God Yahweh quotes Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 16 to 19 over Yeshua's head, making him the prophet, making it clear that Yeshua is the prophet. Let's continue. And so I'm going to now look at, is this the ascension happening in Daniel 7:13, where we see them sleeping? I put the thing over that little verse. All right, so we'll take a quick look at. So I did thumbnail of the whole passage because I don't want to take anything out of context, so you can see the context. Daniel had a dream and a vision upon his bed, verse 1, verse 3 to verse 7. He says there are 4 great beasts. Number 1's a lion. Number 2 is a bear. Number 3 is a leopard. Number 4 is a dreadful beast with iron teeth and 10 horns. And from that 10 horns, he sees another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. So there's some inner conflict in the 10 horns of the fourth beast. The thrones were placed. In the old days, it used to say thrust down, but they realized that's not correct. So the thrones were placed basically in front of God, of these kingdoms. Okay, so in verse 9 of chapter 7 of Daniel, it says, the ancient of days did sit, whose garment or robe was white as snow, and the hair of his head was pure wool, meaning white like snow. And his throne was like fiery flame, and his wheels are burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. So there is a judgment coming, and so this is obviously God preparing for that moment when he's going to judge the world, but it isn't just yet. And I want you to now see why you can believe that while the apostles were asleep, he was up here going to have a meeting with Yahweh. And we're going to see the next thing that happens in the next verse is Jesus is the Son of Man is going to be encountering the Ancient of Days, and the Ancient of Days is going to give him the kingdoms of the world. Okay. And if you notice a similarity between how I just described the Ancient of Days, meaning God, obviously, he was white as snow in his robe, his garment, and his hair was pure wool white. Well, look over here on the side with Mark 9, verse 3. In the Transfiguration, Jesus' raiment became shining, exceedingly white as snow, and so that no fuller brush man, nobody who is a laundry person, could make it any whiter. So there's something that's happened that's identical. It's as if Jesus went into heaven and had this aftover lingering effect from the encounter, that he now had the radiation or the radiating light come on to him from this encounter with Yahweh in heaven. Okay, and now there are prophecies going on in this book of Daniel, chapter 7. So we need to see the context a little bit. So this, even though the judgment is being set, it's being set up for decision making. It's not yet. It's not for the time yet. So we learn that I beheld then because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. So the fourth beast had a single horn that then put down three other horns, and so it's speaking these great words. I beheld even till the beast was slain and his body destroyed, and give it to the burning flame. So this fourth beast apparently was destroyed. As concerning the rest of the beasts, so there are three others. They had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So these other three beasts, if you will, still continue to be in existence by the time we get to the next point, which is another verse or two away, when the Son of Man, that is Jesus, shows up and is going to be presented the kingdoms of the world. And there's still not an end to the world yet. This is a pre-end of world, prior to the judgment of mankind encounter between Jesus as Son of Man and God, Yahweh, as Ancient of Days. Now, here's how he depicts the Son of Man coming up into heaven and addressing Yahweh. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. So does Jesus have to come back down to earth if this is what's happened up in heaven? I mean, he doesn't need approval from the Jewish people. This is where you get your authority. You don't get it by whether the people accept you or don't accept you, which is the dispensational argument. God's given it to him, and that's it. All right. And assume this has happened in the Transfiguration. Assume that explains why all this bright light is glowing off of Jesus, just like it was glowing off of the Ancient of Days in Daniel's first vision of this whole thing. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So I even point out in my little bracketed text there, this mention of the Son of Man intervenes while there is still time yet on the clock of humanity. So you have these. What do we show you in the prior passage? You have these other three beasts. Only one has been destroyed. Three more still survive. Okay, so now we're moving forward, and we're now in verse 15. Daniel says these visions are troubling him. 16, I came near unto one of them that stood by. So some person just standing there. No, it's not clear if it was anyone important, probably some sort of angel. And I asked him the truth of all of this. What's going on? So he told me and made me know the interpretation of things. These great beasts, which are four kings, which shall rise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Okay, but it doesn't get into the detail yet. And that's going to happen next or soon. All right, then, so there's some sort of filler verses that don't advance this, our knowledge of what's going on until we get to 19. Then at 19, it says, then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, and the 10 horns, which we last saw in verse 7, that were in his head, and the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. Now, I'm just gonna throw out something a little bit conjectural in a minute. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. So now we've already seen the Son of Man's already been given his kingdom. That already happened 7 verses ago. We're in verse 21, and now there's this war going on with the saints. And it's still going on, and we're just being informed ahead of time that before long, eventually, not right now, the saints will win because the Ancient of Days will intervene and protect them. So you can see that there's clearly enough time for Jesus to scoot all the way back down to earth and go back to the Transfiguration point and go down there and do what he has to do at the cross. And then he will ascend again, and then there'll be a final coming back with the armies of the heavens. Okay. Now, verse 23, Daniel 7. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. So, yeah, okay, let's continue. And the 10 horns out of the kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. So this fourth beast gave rise to 10 horns. So he may be dead, the beast may be dead, but the horns are still around, and they're really just kingdoms. And another shall rise after them. So those 10 exist, and now there's going to be another, a single horn. And he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. So a single horn rises, and he will subdue 3 kings. And I'm going to suggest to you this may be a spiritual type of war here, and a spiritual kingdom of these 3 kings or rulers against this other single horn. And he, the single horn, shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change the times and the laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit. So basically, whatever determinations that have to be made in judgment is waiting. It's not happening. So it's not going to be executed or worked on at the moment. It's just sitting there waiting to happen. So the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion. So this horn that put down 3 rulers will have his kingdom taken away, but the judgment is still waiting. And they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. So whoever this is, this single horn who'd put down 3 rulers himself will he be consumed, and his dominion will be taken away. And it seems that he will suffer destruction into the end or at the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. So this is mentioned multiple times. And that's good news. That's great news. Okay. I just want to show you, even though we're going to try to get back, and I was just trying to show you the Transfiguration had this useful point where Jesus it could reasonably be concluded that he ascended at the Transfiguration and came back because of this glowing light that's on him. That's identical to the way the Ancient of Days is described in Daniel 7. But I just want to show you something. There's a possibility that God actually put in here a prophecy about Paul, because it's verse 24 and 25 have uncanny prophecy about another. It's actually, that's all it's called. Another shall arise, and he shall subdue the 3 kings. So it's really this amorphous another. It's not like the beast, or it doesn't even say the word horn. It just says another, presumably horn or kingdom or whatever, or king. But anyway, it says, another shall rise, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and he shall think to change the times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and the times and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit. Okay. And we'll see. But I think this is all a fulfillment of a prophecy about Paul. So let's just show you what I've filled in here. Another shall rise, he shall subdue 3 kings. If you read Galatians 2, verse 9, Paul talks about James, Peter, and John as they seem to be 3 pillars. He's putting them down. He's even claiming he could reprove Peter for hypocrisy, for allegedly not eating with Gentiles, when Peter supposedly was willing to eat with Gentiles before people from James showed up. And Peter could have had a very legitimate reason for not wanting to eat with the Gentiles. In the second case, maybe they were eating meat sacrificed to idols, but maybe they weren't in the first case. Maybe they're eating vegetables or things that weren't sacrificed to idols. So, but Paul put him down. So there's this attack on the core 3 of the church, potentially. And so that could be what is going on, so that first prong could be met. He shall speak great words against the Most High. Well, we've been bringing this up repeatedly lately. 2 Thessalonians 2:11-12. Clearly a passage that attributes to God that he shall bring great delusion on those who are being lost, that they shall not come to the truth, and that they will be confirmed in their being deceived. They'll be deceived even more. God's going to accentuate the situation of delusion so that they cannot repent. So, I mean, it doesn't sound like the God I know, but that's what Paul says. That's blasphemy, my friends. Next, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. Well, that clearly involved Paul's killing us from the beginning. And then he engaged in apostasy. He was teaching people to not obey God's law, and that's kind of a wearing out of us. It's like, because it's destroying our spiritual lives. We don't have any anymore, and then we will become lost because we become apostate, just like Paul, and then we have very little chance of being saved. So to me, that's wearing us out, and taking advantage of our ignorance as Gentiles, that we don't know the law enough to know what apostasy even means and where we would look it up in the Bible. It's Deuteronomy 13, by the way. Next, he will think to change the timing of the laws. I think that's even too obvious. Galatians 3, Galatians 4, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians. I mean, he's all over the place telling you, you don't need to obey the law. You don't need to obey the times and seasons, the Sabbath. So it's very clear. And on the law of circumcision, he's even gotten rid of it for Jews because there's no more Jew and Gentile, he says. So why bother getting circumcised? Because there's no Jew anymore. It's been abolished. The whole category doesn't exist. So, I mean, he's really pushed the envelope. And how can anyone think they're going to get away with that crime? And that's a crime. That's a crime to say I'm a human being, and I'm just going to abolish all these laws. I have no authority. I don't even claim any authority from God to do what I'm doing. I'm not quoting him. Paul doesn't quote God ever. He just says, "Oh, the law was given by angels." He doesn't tell you how does he know that? Because it's not in the law. The law shows it's given by Moses, given by Yahweh to Moses. So made up stuff. That's Galatians 3:19. If you don't know what I'm referring to. And then it says it will be given into his hand until a time and times, so that's multiple times, at least two, and the dividing of time. So that would be, could be, actually I put down 2,500 years. That's 3,500 years. Time would be a single time. Times would be at least two. That's 3 times. And a dividing of time, a half. So could that be 3,500 years? Could be. So we might be around a lot longer than we thought. And the judgment shall sit. But the judgment will wait. God can be patient. He's going to just let everything play itself out. All right, so now back to the story. And what was the story? The story was that Jesus is talking about someone who's a ruler. He's going away. He's going to come back. And when he comes back, he's now king. He's been appointed king. We've learned, or we should be learning, that the reason Jesus would get on that donkey, the reason Jesus could tell Pilate, I'm now king, is something happened when it was no longer like it was in the beginning of Jesus' ministry, where a kingdom was at hand. So it was future tense. Now, by the point in time he's doing the donkey ride, and by the time he's talking to Pilate, he's in a place where he is now a king. How did he get transformed from not a king into a king? The Transfiguration is the best likely situation, where he ascended into heaven, had the encounter that's in Daniel 7 verses 13 and 14. So now listen to this verse, and this is the whole point of this message about dispensationalism. So are they free to reject someone who's in Jesus' position just because at one point when Jesus was on earth, he was not yet a king? He said the kingdom is at hand. He's not the king yet because it didn't exist. Kingdom did not exist at first. It was only at hand. It was coming, but it hadn't yet arrived. Then we now know by the end it had arrived. Jesus was now appointed king. So let's listen to the passage now with that in mind. And as they heard these things, he added and spoke a parable, because he was nigh to Jerusalem, and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. He said, therefore, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. And he called his 10 servants and delivered them 10 pounds and said unto them, occupy till I come. So this is someone who knows he's going to be made king in the future and gives a task to his servants. This is what you need to do. And when I come back, I'm going to hold you accountable. But his citizens, so the ruler regards them as still his citizens, even though he hasn't been officially made a king. So let's say he's just to show you, instead of a king, he's not a king yet. Maybe he's a municipal mayor. Think of him that way. So he's given his citizens this instruction, but they hated him. And just like the dispensationalists, they don't give any respect to Jesus currently. Nothing he said or taught us is relevant. We can disregard it completely. That's dispensationalism, and only what Paul teaches is what we follow. And they're explicit. And we have a video. We showed you the videos of Jordan and of Breaker saying this explicitly. Just don't even go there. Just don't even open the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they mean all four of them, not even John. Just you're looking at the wrong instruction pattern, according to them. So they hate him. The dispensationalists hate Jesus Christ. They would say, we don't hate him. We love Jesus, but they don't love his doctrine. They don't want to teach that, and they believe it's wrong to even teach it. Just so we'll love it one day, but not now. I don't know how that can be. If it's good, it's good. It's good now. But anyway, that's how they teach. But his citizens hated him and sent a message after him saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. I put their citizens mean they're members of his kingdom, at least the kingdom that is to come when he went away. But okay, now let's keep going. And it came to pass that when he was returned, having received the kingdom. Now, has Jesus already returned and received the kingdom? Yes, we know he has, because he's talking in past tense later. So even if it didn't happen by this point, it's going to happen very soon because of the donkey ride, because of what he says to Pilate. So he was made a king before he returns back to his servants and seeks accountability. So at some point in time, Jesus is going to come back and hold us all accountable, because he was made king before he even left this earth. And you can't make the argument that dispensationalists make, is that he never became a king here, therefore he never became a king on earth. Therefore, if he becomes a king in heaven, he has no right to assume control over us. So we're not subject to him at this point. That's not true. He was a king before he left. So, and it came to pass that when he was returned, having received the kingdom, then he commanded these servants to be called unto him, to whom he had given the money, that he might know how much every man had gained by trading. Then came the first, saying, Lord, thy pound has gained 10 pounds. And he said unto him, Well, thou good and good servant, because thou hast been faithful in a very little, have thou authority over 10 cities. And the second came, saying, Lord, thy pound has gained 5 pounds. And he said, Likewise, then be thou also over 5 cities. And another came, saying, Lord, behold, here is thy pound, which I have kept laid up in a napkin. Oh boy, that wasn't a smart move. For I feared you, because you are an austere man. You take up that which you did not lay down, and you reap what you did not sow. This is not the way to win friends and influence persons with your boss. For I feared you, because you are... Okay, the same verse. So what did this person... We need to assess what's going on here, because this is in Luke. Supposedly, clearly he's been friends with Paul. He's been on mission trips with Paul, but he doesn't have a gospel like Paul. Paul's gospel is unknown, let's put it this way, to Luke, and Luke is teaching what Jesus teaches. So this says somebody who produced no works to benefit the king, who had been a servant, so legitimate Christian, if you put the analogy into the church. And this person even knows he's in trouble. His defense is the king has no moral right to reap what he did not sow, and thus it was unfair for him to expect any works. This is very much like dispensationalists and all Paulinists, which basically say, I'm promised by Paul, it's faith, not works, and God has to accept me as I am. And that's, in fact, in all the songs we sing every Sunday. And, I'm not going to worry about anything. I'm going to live my life the way I want to live it, and that's it, because I was given permission to live this way by Paul. And the answer is no. You're going to find out Jesus is exactly what? Just what this person says, I feared you were an austere man. He is an austere man, and you're going to find out how austere he really is. So it's not cheap grace. It's not grace like you think, many people think. It's going to be a very, very tough day for people who believe this kind of nonsense, that you can just have no works, don't do any good for the charity, for the poor, or do anything like that, and you're going to skate in because you have faith alone. That's what you're promised, but it's not true. So here we'll see what Jesus thinks about Paul's doctrines. And he said unto him, Out of your own mouth will I judge you, you wicked servant. You knew that I was an austere man, taking up that which I did not lay down, and reaping that which I did not sow. Why then did you not give my money to the bank, that at my coming I might have been returned mine own with interest? And he said unto them that stood by, Take from him the pound, and give it to him that has 10 pounds. And they said unto him, Lord, he has 10 pounds. Like they're astonished. What are you going to do? Take it away from him? For I say unto you, Jesus says, that unto everyone which has shall be given, and from him that has not, even that he has, the little that he has, meaning, shall be taken away from him. So it's going to be a very rough day for those people who had no works and just had faith. Now, this is now back to Matthew 25, verses 26 to 28, but it's also identical to Luke in the passage we're reading. So this is where these passages actually converge. This is very interesting. So even though they're often titled differently, they're really the same parable, just using different translation method. Whoever was doing this, if it was Luke or Matthew, they would just make it a little bit to suit the context or the language or vocabulary of the people they were writing to. But his master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown." So this is very much like what we just read. "I have not sown and gather where I scatter no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents." So it's the same story, same thing. It's just talents versus other coins. So it's identical to Luke. But what's interesting when you do it this way, we're going to find out one verse was dropped in Luke that is in Matthew, and then there's one verse in Matthew which is you can pick up in Luke. So by reading them together, you recover 2 verses net, and you get the whole story. So it's just apparently a copying mistake, and whoever was recopying these things, and because they're probably so similar, and they're it's just somebody made a mistake, but you can fix it. Okay, so here we go. 29. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Does he call him a non-servant? No, he was his servant who didn't do anything, who just relied on their faith alone, and we're going to make it into heaven because that's what we've been told. And we didn't want to listen to Jesus. We depended on Apostle Paul to tell us this, and we're going to find out, ladies and gentlemen, he isn't even an apostle. That's the truth. Sorry to tell you that. Parable of the unproductive servant continues. Luke 19, verse 11 to 27. Now, this is rejected by citizen members of the kingdom. So we're going to learn that the citizen members of the kingdom reject their ruler, their king who comes. And this is verse 27 that was dropped in Matthew. So Matthew should have had this, but didn't. So you see, this is when you pull these together, you can now recover a verse that's lost in Matthew, but really is right here. But those mine enemies, meaning among his own citizens, these were people like the dispensationalists who say, we don't want to listen to what Jesus has to say. We're following Paul, and that's the end of that, which would not that I should reign over them. Just give me Paul. That's what Breaker says. That's what Jordan says. Bring him hither and slay them before me. So if you are a dispensationalist, this is the verdict. You're seeing it ahead of time. If you stay with this view that you can live in a dispensational bubble and not pay attention to Jesus Christ, your master, you will face this ruling at the end of time. Slay them before me. Do you want that? Hope not. Okay, and just so that we know, there's another parable just like what we saw. This is one of just a master and a servant, not a king and a servant, but it has the same message as we saw in the king versus his citizens message. And this says, if that servant, good and faithful servant, says to himself, my master, which could be a king, but it technically in the parable, it's a master or my employer, is delayed in coming and begins to beat the male and female servants and to eat and drink and get drunk. And the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him and an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the unfaithful, that is the epistone or epistos. And what the scholars do show is the meaning in this context is clearly not an issue of whether they had faith or not faith. This is whether they had acted impiously, basically beating other people who were other servants of the same master, or did wickedly by having drinking and dissipation of your life and doing nothing but, entertaining yourself with eat, drink, and be merry activities. And as Bill Mounsey says in other contexts, this apistos can have a meaning of both moral failure, and sometimes they like to say, "Do not live up to your faith." Well, that's now it's faith plus. It's not just faith on facts. So a lot of us has a misunderstanding that we're going to be saved if we believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, because that's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4. But that's not what Jesus says here, right? He says you're going to lose it if you have disobedience. That's basically it. And then John 12:48, similarly, he that rejects me and receives not my word. So if you're not listening and obeying Jesus, what he says, he has one that judges him. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. So that means you can't say, I believed, but I didn't have to listen to your words. I didn't have to obey you. He's going to say, my words will judge you in the last day. So don't be in that boat. Okay, I think we're pretty much done. All right, that's it. So I hope this helps everybody to understand dispensationalism better. And I think we can see that Jesus made it clear in the parable of the 10 minas that when he goes away to get a kingdom and he comes back, he expects his citizens to be productive while he was gone. And he went and obtained his kingdom. And in this case, he obtained his kingdom before he left this earth. The dispensationalists are incorrect. They didn't get that at all. And we're waiting for him to come back with the kingdom, and his rules don't apply until he comes back. No, his rules are in effect now. He came back when he was given this kingship. And how do we know that? Because we have confirmation that what happens in Daniel 7, 13, 14 really happened at Transfiguration, because the same effect happened to Jesus as was going on in the kingdom hall with the Ancient of Days, with all this bright white light on people's garments and hair and all this kind of stuff. And that's what Jesus looked like when he came back down. And it also matches when Jesus says, he talks about the one who was in heaven and came and descended from heaven. And so this also explains those passages too. All right. I hope this helps everybody and gives us, and then I gave you the prophecy of Daniel, right? Daniel talks in 24:25, I think it was, that about 4 or 5 characteristics of this horn who puts down 3 rulers, and that's what it actually says, puts them down. And so that could be John, Peter, and James. And then he wants to change the times and the laws and the seasons. So he's not a good person. He's prophesied in the Word of God multiple times in a negative light. So another reason, if you're a dispensationalist, to give up that doctrine, reevaluate, reassess everything, and come back to Jesus Christ, and just disregard everything you learned about dispensationalism. You're following the wrong person. Paul is not whom you should be listening to. You should only be following the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, everybody. Hope that helps. God bless. Ciao.